Logan Kane stepped off the battered city bus as it screeched to a halt on the bustling street. The acrid smell of exhaust fumes filled his nose as he adjusted the faded duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The city pulsed with life, voices shouting, cars honking, and neon signs flickering in every direction. Logan's weathered boots hit the cracked pavement, his eyes scanning the chaotic surroundings. He was a man used to blending in, and this city was perfect for disappearing. Logan didn't come here for a fresh start. He didn't even come with a plan. For the past year, he drifted from one town to the next, carrying the weight of his past like a stone in his chest. This city was just another stop, another place where he could fade into the background and maybe find some semblance of peace. His sharp, vigilant eyes caught every detail, a habit born of years spent in war zones. The clink of metal drew his attention to a nearby alley, where a modest repair shop sat wedged between two dilapidated buildings. The sign above the shop read, Miles Auto Repair. Its letters faded but still legible. Logan stopped just short of the entrance, watching as a man, mid-30s, wiry but strong, rolled out from beneath a car on a mechanic's creeper. His face was streaked with grease, but there was a quiet determination in his movements. Ethan Miles stood and wiped his hands on a rag, his brow furrowed as he inspected the undercarriage of the vehicle. The shop was bustling, with two employees working on other cars in the bay and a customer chatting at the counter. Logan observed Ethan's calm demeanor as he juggled multiple tasks at once. Something about the man's unwavering focus reminded Logan of the soldiers he used to serve alongside, people who kept pushing forward no matter the odds. Logan leaned against the wall of the alley, letting the shadows cloak him. He wasn't ready to interact with anyone yet. Instead, he watched as Ethan exchanged a quick joke with one of his employees, the laughter breaking the monotony of the street's noise. The shop felt grounded, real. Logan hadn't felt that way in years. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Logan hadn't moved much from his spot near the repair shop. He'd spent the day observing, taking in the rhythm of the place. As night fell, the streets grew quieter, and the repair shop's lights flickered off one by one. Ethan locked up for the night, glancing around the alley as he stepped outside. Logan pressed further into the shadows, his heart thudding faster than it should have. Old habits died hard. Ethan lingered for a moment, his eyes scanning the darkened street. For a second, Logan thought the man might have noticed him, but Ethan turned away, his footsteps echoing as he walked toward a nearby diner. Logan exhaled slowly, his grip on his duffel bag loosening, deciding he needed a place to stay. Logan found a corner of the alley where an overhang shielded him from the drizzle that had begun to fall. He laid out his threadbare jacket as a makeshift pillow and leaned against the wall. The repair shop was still on his mind as his eyes closed. The faint smell of oil and grease lingered in the air, mingling with the distant hum of the city. Logan didn't sleep well that night. He never did. The ghosts of his past crept into his dreams, pulling him back to the deserts and jungles where he'd once fought. But even in his restless state, he found himself thinking of the repair shop, a small beacon of stability in a world that no longer made sense to him. Logan Kane woke to the faint sound of rain dripping onto the cracked pavement. His muscles ached as he stretched, the cold stiffness of the alley lingering in his joints. The early morning light struggled to penetrate the thick clouds hanging over the city, casting a muted gray over everything. He glanced toward the repair shop, which was still closed. The sign on the door read, "Hours, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. As he sat up, Logan caught the scent of coffee drifting from a nearby cart parked along the street. Pulling a crumpled bill from his pocket, he decided to treat himself. Coffee wasn't a luxury he often indulged in, but something about this place, a small spark of life he couldn't quite place, made him linger. Clutching the warm paper cup in his hands, Logan found a new spot to watch the repair shop. He perched on a bench just across the street, blending in with the sparse morning crowd. At exactly 8 a.m., Ethan Miles arrived, unlocking the shop's glass door with practiced ease. A truck parked a few feet away honked twice, and Ethan waved, signaling to a delivery driver to back into the loading bay. Even in the rain, the shop's rhythm picked up quickly. Employees arrived, customers rolled in, and the distinct clang of tools striking metal filled the air. Logan took a sip of his coffee, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Something about the scene reminded him of the structure he used to live by, the routines and rituals that made chaotic days manageable. By mid-morning, Logan noticed something different. A group of men loitered near the corner of the street. Their postures predatory and their eyes fixed on the shop. They weren't customers. Their matching black jackets and too casual demeanor made it clear they were trouble. Logan's instincts kicked in as he assessed the group. 3 men led by a tall, broad-shouldered man with slicked back hair. The leader, Mason Cole, sauntered toward the shop with a swagger that screamed entitlement. The other 2 followed close behind, whispering and laughing among themselves. Logan's jaw tightened, the scene feeling all too familiar. He had seen men like them before, bullies feeding on the fear of those weaker than themselves. Inside the shop, Ethan was busy checking paperwork at the front desk when the bell above the door jingled. He looked up, his friendly smile faltering slightly as Mason and his crew entered. "You the owner?" Mason asked, his voice carrying a lazy menace. He strolled toward the counter, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Ethan straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's right. Can I help you?" Mason smirked, leaning on the counter. "Yeah, you can. Heard you're doing pretty good business around here. We just wanted to, make sure you're staying protected." Ethan's expression darkened. Protected? The taller of Mason's crew, a wiry man with a tattoo snaking up his neck, chuckled. "Yeah, you wouldn't want anything bad to happen to this nice place of yours. Right?" Logan's hand tightened around his coffee cup as he watched from across the street. The scene was playing out exactly as he'd feared. Ethan didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but there was steel behind his words. "If you're here to intimidate me, you can save your breath. I'm not interested." Mason's smirk faded, his tone hardening. "You don't get it, do you? This ain't a negotiation. You're on our turf. That means you pay your dues. I'm not paying you a damn thing." Ethan snapped, stepping around the counter. He was smaller than Mason, but his posture spoke volumes. He wouldn't back down easily. For a moment, the tension in the shop was palpable. Mason tilted his head, studying Ethan with a predatory glint in his eyes. "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said, taking a step closer. Before the situation could escalate, the bell jingled again. Logan stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. The rain glistened on his jacket as his piercing eyes locked onto Mason. "Is there a problem here?" Logan asked, his voice steady and low. Mason turned, his smirk returning as he sized Logan up. "And who the hell are you?" Logan stepped further inside, his movements deliberate. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he stood beside Ethan, his imposing presence speaking louder than words. Ethan glanced at Logan, surprise flashing across his face. But he didn't say anything. Mason's smirk faltered slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged. After a tense pause, he chuckled and raised his hands in mock surrender. "All right, tough guy. We'll leave, for now. But don't think this is over." He motioned for his crew, and they filed out, but not before the tattooed man shot Logan a glare and muttered, "You just made a mistake." Logan didn't move until the door swung shut behind them. Then he turned to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said, his voice still tight with adrenaline. Logan shrugged. "Maybe not, but I'm not one to stand by when people like them think they can take whatever they want." Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks, I owe you one." Logan glanced at the door, his sharp eyes scanning the street. "You don't owe me anything. But you've got a problem now. They'll be back." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured as much, but I'm not about to let them scare me out of my own shop." Logan's jaw tightened as he weighed his options. He hadn't planned on getting involved, but now he was in it. "You'll need more than guts to deal with them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And you're offering to help?" Logan hesitated. This wasn't his fight, but as he looked at the determination in Ethan's eyes, he felt something stir, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Let's just say I don't like unfinished business," Logan said finally. Ethan nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Fair enough." As the rain continued to fall outside, Logan had the distinct feeling that this city, and this shop, was about to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The following morning, the air was thick with tension as Logan Kane stood by the entrance of Ethan's shop, his sharp eyes scanning the street. The memory of Mason Cole and his crew from the previous day lingered in his mind. He'd seen their type before. Predators who thrived on intimidation. Confident no one would stand up to them. Logan had spent years dismantling men like them in war zones. And he knew their next move was only a matter of time. Ethan Miles arrived a few minutes later. Coffee in hand and a determined expression on his face. He nodded at Logan as he unlocked the shop door. "You're here early." Logan shrugged. "Didn't sleep much. Figured I'd keep an eye on things." Ethan chuckled dryly as he flipped the sign to open. "You've got a knack for understatement." As the shop stirred to life, Logan remained near the entrance. His posture relaxed but alert. Ethan worked efficiently, balancing repair orders and chatting with customers. Despite his friendly demeanor, Logan could see the tension in his movements, the way he occasionally glanced at the door or double-checked the locks. The encounter with Mason had rattled him, though he tried not to show it. By mid-morning, the shop was running smoothly. But Logan decided it was time to talk strategy. He stepped up to Ethan, who was bent over a clipboard near the front desk. "You've got cameras here?" Logan asked, his tone casual. Ethan looked up, puzzled. "Yeah, a couple. Why? Do they work?" Ethan shrugged. "Well enough. They cover the front entrance and part of the alley." "Why?" Logan gestured toward the shop's layout. "Mason and his guys aren't done. If they're planning something, we need to know when they're coming." Ethan straightened, frowning. "You really think they'll try again?" Logan's expression darkened. "I'd bet on it. Guys like Mason don't take no for an answer. And when someone stands up to them, it makes them look weak. They'll want to fix that." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Great. Just what I need. We can deal with it," Logan said firmly. "But we have to be ready." Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, what do you have in mind?" Over the next few hours, Logan and Ethan worked together to reinforce the shop. Logan's tactical mind came alive, assessing vulnerabilities and turning the modest space into a defensible stronghold. They repositioned the cameras to eliminate blind spots, added extra locks to the back door, and moved heavy equipment to create barriers that could slow down an intruder. Ethan watched Logan work with a mix of curiosity and respect. "You've done this before," he said as Logan secured a heavy-duty wrench rack near the entrance. Logan didn't look up. "Something like it." Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging him since the day before. "What did you do before all this?" Logan paused, his grip tightening on the wrench he was holding. He didn't answer immediately, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Special Forces. Long time ago." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. "That explains a lot." Logan shrugged, setting the wrench down. "It doesn't matter now. That life's behind me." Ethan wasn't convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he gestured toward the counter. "Well, if it makes you feel any better, you've got a knack for this. You ever think about doing something more stable?" Logan smirked faintly. "Like fixing cars?" Ethan chuckled. "Hey, it's honest work, and you'd be good at it." Logan didn't respond, but something about the offer stuck with him. It had been years since anyone had seen potential in him beyond his ability to fight. The idea of staying in one place, of building something worthwhile, felt foreign. But not entirely unwelcome. As the afternoon wore on, a delivery truck pulled into the lot, and Ethan stepped outside to greet the driver. Logan stayed inside, checking the locks one last time. He was just about to grab a drink from the small fridge in the corner when he noticed movement outside the shop. A figure stood across the street, partially obscured by the shadow of a building. They weren't moving, but their posture was unmistakable, watching. Logan's instincts flared. He stepped closer to the window, careful to remain out of sight as he studied the figure. It wasn't Mason, but the man's leather jacket and tattooed arms marked him as one of Mason's crew. Logan's jaw tightened. They were scouting, gathering intel before making their next move. Ethan returned moments later, his face lighting up when he saw Logan. "Delivery guy says the parts for the Civic are delayed, but we should have them by tomorrow." "Not ideal, but..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Logan's expression. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering. Logan nodded toward the window. "One of Mason's guys. Across the street." Ethan moved to look, but Logan held up a hand to stop him. "Don't. If they know we've spotted them, it could escalate things faster." Ethan frowned. "So what do we do?" "Nothing for now," Logan said, "but they're not just here to look around. Mason's planning something, and he's sending a message." Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. You really think they'll try again? After what happened yesterday? Logan turned to him, his expression grim. Not think. No. And next time, they won't be subtle. Ethan's jaw tightened as he nodded. Then we make sure they don't get what they're after. Logan smirked faintly. Now you're thinking like a soldier. As the day wound down and the shop closed for the night, Logan decided to stick around. Ethan offered him a makeshift cot in the back room, and while it wasn't exactly comfortable, it beat sleeping in the alley. The quiet of the shop after hours was almost peaceful, but Logan's mind remained sharp, scanning every creak and shadow. He could feel the storm brewing. Mason's crew wouldn't stay quiet for long. Before he lay down, Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding 2 beers. He handed one to Logan and sat on a nearby crate. I know this isn't your fight, Ethan said, breaking the silence. You could have walked away, but you didn't. I won't forget that. Logan took a sip of his beer, his gaze distant. I've spent too long walking away. Maybe it's time I stopped. Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. They sat in silence for a while, the distant hum of the city their only company. Logan didn't know what the next few days would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. And that was enough to keep him in the fight. Logan Kane awoke to the faint sound of tools clanking in the shop. For a moment, he forgot where he was, the small cot, the faint smell of oil and grease, the hum of the city outside. It was far removed from the places he'd slept before, military barracks, cramped tents, and cold alleys. This, strangely, felt more grounded. As he sat up and stretched, he heard Ethan's voice carrying from the main bay. Logan stood, grabbed his jacket, and stepped out of the back room. The shop was already alive with activity. Ethan was working under the hood of a car, his face streaked with grease, while one of the mechanics, a wiry young man named Matt, organized tools on a nearby workbench. Morning, Ethan called without looking up. Morning, Logan replied, his voice gruff. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter and leaned against the wall, watching the shop's rhythm unfold. But beneath the hum of activity, Logan could feel the tension hanging in the air. Ethan's movements were a little too quick, his glances toward the entrance too frequent. Logan knew Ethan was thinking the same thing he was. It was only a matter of time before Mason Cole and his crew made their move. Around mid-morning, a police cruiser pulled up outside the shop. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to meet the officer. Logan followed, staying in the shadows of the entrance. The officer, a broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, greeted Ethan with a curt nod. His badge read, Officer Grant. You Ethan Miles? The officer asked. That's me, Ethan replied. What can I do for you? Grant glanced around, his gaze briefly settling on Logan before returning to Ethan. We've had reports of a gang causing trouble in this area. Mason Cole's crew. You had any dealings with them? Ethan's jaw tightened. They came by a couple of days ago. Tried to shake me down for protection money. I told them I wasn't interested. Grant sighed, his expression grim. Mason's been a thorn in our side for months. He's got half the businesses in this area paying up, and the other half too scared to come forward. Well, I'm not paying him, Ethan said firmly. The officer gave him a long look. I respect that, but be careful. Mason doesn't take no for an answer. If they come back, call us. Ethan frowned. With all due respect, officer, I don't think Mason's going to wait for me to make a phone call. Grant hesitated, then nodded. You're probably right. Just watch your back. As the officer got back into his cruiser and drove off, Ethan turned to Logan, who had been silently observing the exchange. You heard all that? Ethan asked. Logan nodded. Cops know who Mason is, but they won't move until he does something they can't ignore. Ethan exhaled sharply. So, we're on our own. Logan's gaze hardened. Not exactly. We've got each other. As the afternoon wore on, Logan and Ethan worked to finalize their preparations. They fortified the shop further, adding extra reinforcements to the windows and ensuring the cameras were positioned perfectly. Logan also mapped out potential escape routes, just in case things went south. While they worked, Ethan couldn't help but ask the question that had been on his mind. You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you? Logan paused, tightening a bolt on a makeshift barricade. You could say that. Ethan leaned against the counter, studying him. What happened? Why'd you leave it behind? Logan didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Not all fights are worth fighting. I stayed in one too long. And it cost me everything. So I walked away. Ethan nodded slowly. And now you're here. Now I'm here. Logan agreed, his tone neutral. Well, Ethan said after a moment. I'm glad you are. I don't think I could handle this alone. You're tougher than you think. Logan replied, but the faintest trace of a smirk tugged at his lips. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the shop began to empty out. Matt and the other employees finished their shifts and headed home, leaving Logan and Ethan alone. The quiet felt oppressive, a reminder of the storm brewing just outside. It was just after sunset when the first sign of trouble appeared. A car pulled up outside the shop, its engine rumbling low. Logan stepped to the window, his sharp eyes narrowing as he watched two men step out. One of them, a tall, wiry figure, carried a baseball bat. The other, shorter and stockier, held what looked like a crowbar. They're here, Logan muttered. Ethan joined him at the window, his face pale but resolute. Just two of them? For now, Logan said. This is a message. Mason's letting us know he hasn't forgotten. The two men approached the shop's entrance. But instead of trying to break in, they began smashing the windows. The shattering glass echoed through the alley, and Logan could feel the heat rising in his chest. He clenched his fists, his instincts screaming at him to act. Stay here, Logan said firmly, stepping toward the door. Wait, Ethan started, but Logan was already outside. The two men turned as Logan stepped into the open. He moved with a deliberate calm, his hands at his sides but ready for action. The taller man with the baseball bat sneered. Well, look who it is. Big tough guy from the other day. Logan's voice was steady, cold. You've got one chance to walk away. The shorter man laughed, swinging the crowbar casually. Or what? You gonna lecture us to death? Logan didn't respond. He simply moved. In a blur of motion, he stepped forward, his hand snapping out to grab the bat mid-swing. With a sharp twist, he disarmed the taller man and drove the end of the bat into his stomach, sending him sprawling to the ground. The shorter man lunged, but Logan sidestepped easily, delivering a precise elbow to the back of his head. The man crumpled to the pavement, groaning in pain. Logan stood over them, his expression unreadable. Go back to Mason. Tell him this isn't his turf anymore. The taller man coughed, clutching his stomach as he staggered to his feet. He grabbed his partner, and the two of them stumbled back to their car, peeling out into the night. Logan watched them go, his body still coiled like a spring. When he turned back toward the shop, Ethan was standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of awe and concern. You didn't have to go out there alone, Ethan said. Logan shrugged. Better me than you. Ethan nodded, stepping aside to let Logan back inside. What now? Logan's gaze was sharp as steel. Now we wait. Mason won't like what just happened. And next time, he'll bring more. The shop was eerily quiet after Logan's confrontation. Shards of broken glass crunched underfoot as Ethan swept up the remnants of the shattered windows. The metallic hum of a lone workbench light was the only sound. Save for their breathing, Logan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed and his sharp eyes scanning the street outside. His expression was calm, but Ethan could tell his mind was running through countless scenarios. You think they'll come back tonight? Ethan asked, pausing to dump the broken glass into a bin. Logan shook his head. No, Mason's smarter than that. He'll wait until he has the numbers. Ethan sighed, resting the broom against the wall. And what do we do until then? Just sit here, waiting for them to bring the fight to us? Logan turned to him, his gaze steady. We use the time to prepare. They're not just coming for you now, they're coming to prove a point. If we're not ready, they'll tear this place apart. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, his jaw tightening. This shop means everything to me. Logan, I won't let them take it. Logan's expression softened slightly. They won't, but you need to trust me. Ethan nodded, his determination hardening. All right, what's the plan? Logan spent the next several hours walking Ethan through a series of defenses. They boarded up the shattered windows with spare wood from the storage room and reinforced the back door with metal bars. Logan inspected the shop's layout with the precision of a battlefield strategist, identifying choke points and places where they could use the environment to their advantage. You've got any tools that could double as weapons? Logan asked as they worked. Ethan smirked faintly. You're in a repair shop. Logan, Take your pick. Logan chuckled dryly, grabbing a tire iron and giving it an experimental swing. Fair point. They positioned heavy tools strategically around the shop, wrenches, crowbars, even a spare jack stand. Logan also found a few cans of industrial-grade lubricant, which he suggested placing near the entrances. Slippery floors could buy us a few seconds, Logan explained. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You really think this through, don't you? It's the only way to stay alive, Logan said matter-of-factly. As the preparations continued, a knock came at the shop's front door. Both men froze, their eyes locking. Logan motioned for Ethan to stay back as he approached the door. His tire iron gripped tightly in his hand. Through the boarded-up window, Logan caught a glimpse of a young man standing outside, his hands raised in surrender. It was Matt, one of Ethan's mechanics. Logan opened the door cautiously. Matt, what are you doing here? Ethan asked, stepping forward. I heard about what happened, Matt said, his voice low. The guys at the diner were talking about Mason's crew showing up here. I figured you'd need some help. Ethan smiled faintly, clapping Matt on the shoulder. I appreciate it, but you don't need to get involved. Matt shook his head. This shop gave me a second chance. Ethan, you gave me a second chance. I'm not letting those guys destroy that. Logan studied Matt for a moment, then gave a curt nod. All right, if you're staying, you follow my lead. No heroics. Understand? Yes, sir, Matt said, standing a little straighter. Ethan raised an eyebrow. He's not even working for you. And he's already calling you, sir. Logan smirked. Old habits die hard. Night fell quickly, and the tension in the shop grew thicker with each passing hour. Logan stood near the front window, his sharp gaze scanning the street. Matt was stationed near the back door, while Ethan worked on a makeshift barricade in the main bay. Around midnight, Logan's instincts flared. He caught movement down the street, a dark SUV slowing as it passed the shop. It didn't stop, but the way it lingered set Logan on edge. They're watching us, Logan muttered. Ethan glanced up from his work. Mason? Most likely, Logan said. They're gauging our defenses, seeing if we're ready. Ethan's grip on the hammer tightened. Let them come. Logan gave him a faint smirk. You've got fire. I'll give you that. Just make sure you keep your head when the time comes. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I will. An hour later, the sound of an engine roaring up the street shattered the silence. Logan, Ethan, and Matt snapped to attention as a motorcycle skidded to a stop in front of the shop. A lone rider, clad in leather and a helmet, dismounted and approached the door. He held a piece of paper in one hand, waving it at the boarded-up window. You got a message from Mason, the rider shouted, his voice muffled by the helmet. Logan exchanged a glance with Ethan before stepping forward. He opened the door just wide enough to take the paper. The rider smirked under his visor. Tick-tock, the rider said before straddling his bike and peeling away into the night. Logan unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the scrawled message. It was short and to the point. Tomorrow night, midnight, be ready to pay, or else. Ethan read the note over Logan's shoulder, his expression darkening. They're giving us a deadline. Logan folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Good, that gives us time. Matt stepped closer, his face pale but resolute. You really think we can take them? Logan's gaze was hard as steel. We don't have a choice. As the night wore on, the three men sat in the back room, taking turns watching the entrances. The weight of what was coming pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Ethan broke the silence first. You know, I always thought this shop would be the last thing I'd ever have to fight for. He said, his voice low. Never imagined I'd have to defend it like this. Logan leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. The things worth keeping are always the ones you have to fight the hardest for. Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. What about you? What are you fighting for? Logan didn't answer right away. He stared at the tire iron resting on the table, his fingers tracing the worn handle. For a long time, I wasn't fighting for anything, just surviving. But this, he glanced around the shop. This feels different. Ethan smiled faintly, glad to hear it, as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the boarded windows. The three men knew the real battle was still ahead. They had less than 24 hours to prepare for the fight of their lives. The morning light crept through the cracks of the boarded-up windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the shop floor. Logan Kane stood at the workbench, meticulously inspecting a makeshift weapon he'd crafted from a piece of piping and an old wrench. His movements were deliberate, his mind razor sharp. Across the room, Ethan Miles pored over a diagram of the shop layout, marking potential entry points and weak spots. Matt, their newest recruit in this unexpected battle, returned from the corner store with supplies. He set down a bag containing water bottles, snacks, and first aid kits. "This all feels surreal," Matt said, exhaling sharply as he leaned against the counter. "I mean, we're mechanics. Now I don't even know what to call this." Ethan gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We're defending what's ours. That's all." Logan looked up, his voice calm but commanding. "This isn't about what we do for a living. It's about standing our ground. Mason thinks he owns this city. And tonight, we show him he doesn't." Matt nodded, swallowing hard. "Right." Ethan gestured toward the blueprint on the counter. "Logan, take a look. I've marked the entry points we need to reinforce." Logan stepped closer, scanning the diagram. "Good. We'll use the barricades to funnel them into the main bay. That gives us control of the battlefield." "Battlefield," Matt muttered, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd hear that word in a repair shop." Logan smirked faintly. "Welcome to reality, kid." The hours ticked by as the three men worked tirelessly to prepare the shop. They rigged the entrance with tripwires attached to cans of industrial lubricant, creating makeshift deterrents that would send anyone unlucky enough to trigger them sliding across the concrete floor. Heavy tools were strategically placed near every choke point, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. In the back, Logan and Ethan moved an old shelving unit to block the secondary entrance. "This should buy us time if they try to flank us," Logan said, grunting as they secured the shelves with ropes. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "You really think Mason will send everything he's got?" Logan's gaze was steady. "Men like Mason don't back down after being humiliated. He'll bring numbers, maybe even weapons. We can't underestimate him." Ethan nodded, his determination hardening. "Then we'll be ready." Late in the afternoon, as the three men took a brief break to eat, there was a knock at the boarded-up entrance. Logan's hand immediately went to the crowbar he'd been carrying, while Matt grabbed a nearby wrench. Ethan cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" Ethan called out. "It's me, Anna," came the familiar voice of the shop's accountant. Ethan's eyes widened, and he quickly opened the door just enough to let her in. Anna stepped inside, her expression a mix of concern and anger. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "What the hell is going on, Ethan? I passed two guys earlier who looked like they'd been hit by a train. And they were muttering something about this place." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated." Anna crossed her arms. "Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. Word's getting around that Mason Cole has it out for you. Is that true?" Logan stepped forward, his presence commanding. "It's true. Mason tried to extort Ethan, and when that didn't work, he decided to escalate. Tonight, he's bringing the fight here." Anna stared at Logan, her brow furrowing. "And you are?" "Logan Kane," he said simply. Anna looked back at Ethan. "So what's the plan?" Ethan hesitated, but Logan stepped in. "We're defending the shop. Mason doesn't get to walk in here and take what he wants." Anna's sharp gaze shifted between the three men, and after a long pause, she sighed. "All right, what do you need?" Ethan blinked. "Wait, you want to help?" Anna smirked. "You think I'm going to sit back and let Mason destroy the business I've been keeping in the black for 5 years? Not a chance." Logan nodded in approval. "Good, we can use another set of hands." By the time the sun set, the shop was fortified and ready. The 4 defenders sat around the back room, the air thick with tension. Each of them carried a weapon. Logan with his modified pipe wrench club, Ethan with a crowbar, Matt with a tire iron, and Anna holding a heavy flashlight that could double as a bludgeon. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the building or the faint hum of the streetlights outside. "You've been quiet," Anna said, her eyes on Logan. "What's going through your head?" Logan didn't look up from the floor. "Calculating, running through scenarios." "Anything good?" Matt asked nervously. Logan's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "We've got a chance." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That's all I need." At exactly midnight, the distant roar of engines broke the quiet. Logan stood immediately, his sharp eyes narrowing as he moved to the window. 3 vehicles pulled up in front of the shop: an SUV, a pickup truck, and a sedan. The doors opened, and a group of men climbed out. At least a dozen of them, led by Mason Cole himself. Ethan joined Logan at the window, his jaw tightening. "That's more than I expected." Logan handed Ethan a flashlight. "Numbers don't matter if they can't outthink us." Outside, Mason strode to the front of the group, his swagger unmistakable. He raised his voice, loud enough to carry through the boarded windows. "Ethan, we gave you a chance to make this easy. Now we're taking what we want." Ethan clenched his fists, but Logan placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Stick to the plan. Let them make the first move." Mason motioned for his men to move forward. They approached the shop cautiously, clearly aware that something wasn't right. The first man to reach the door tested the handle. Finding it locked, he stepped back, gesturing for another to join him with a crowbar. Logan's grip on his weapon tightened. The first strike against the door echoed through the shop like a thunderclap. "Here we go," Logan muttered. The defenders exchanged a tense glance. The storm was here, and there was no turning back now. The first crack of the crowbar against the door echoed through the shop like a gunshot. Logan Kane stood near the shadows, gripping his improvised weapon with a steady hand. His sharp eyes flicked to Ethan, Matt, and Anna, each of them positioned at their posts. They exchanged a single nod, silent confirmation that they were ready. Outside, Mason Cole's crew worked furiously on the door, their laughter and crude taunts audible even through the wooden boards. "Not so tough now, huh, Miles?" Mason shouted. "You gonna pay up, or do we have to make an example out of your little toy shop?" Another loud crack, and the door's frame began to splinter. Logan gestured for everyone to hold their positions, his voice low and calm. "Let them come in. The tighter the space, the harder it'll be for them to use their numbers." With one final strike, the door gave way, swinging open with a deafening crash. A man in a leather jacket stepped inside cautiously, a crowbar raised in one hand. Behind him, 2 others followed, their footsteps heavy on the concrete floor. Logan counted quickly, 3 inside, 9 more waiting outside. Good, they were testing the waters. The first man stepped further into the shop, glancing around at the dimly lit space. "Place is a dump," he muttered, his voice carrying through the silence. "Where are they?" "They're here," Logan said, stepping out of the shadows. The man spun, startled, but Logan didn't give him time to react. With a single, fluid motion, he swung his makeshift club, the heavy pipe wrench connecting with the man's ribs. The thug crumpled to the ground with a pained groan. The second man charged, raising his crowbar, but Logan sidestepped easily. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it sharply and sending the weapon clattering to the floor. A quick elbow to the jaw sent the second attacker staggering into a nearby workbench. The third man hesitated, glancing at his fallen comrades. But before he could retreat, Ethan lunged from his hiding spot. With a crowbar of his own, Ethan swung upward, catching the man in the stomach. The thug doubled over, collapsing in a heap. Outside, Mason and the rest of his crew were growing restless. The sounds of the brief scuffle carried through the night, followed by silence. "What the hell's going on in there?" Mason barked, motioning for 3 more men to head inside. This time, they were more aggressive, storming into the shop with pipes and wrenches in hand. They didn't notice the tripwires strung across the entryway until it was too late. The lead thug triggered the line, sending a can of industrial lubricant tumbling to the ground. The contents spilled across the floor, turning the concrete into a slick, treacherous surface. The first man slipped, crashing to the ground with a loud grunt. The second stumbled but managed to keep his balance, just long enough for Matt to step forward and swing his tire iron at the man's knee. The attacker cried out, collapsing in pain. The third man avoided the spill entirely, charging straight toward Ethan, but Anna, positioned near the side of the bay, stepped into his path. With a fierce determination, she swung her heavy flashlight, the metal casing connecting with the thug's shoulder. He yelped, dropping his weapon and staggering backward. Logan stepped in to finish him off, delivering a sharp kick that sent the man sprawling. "Nice work," Logan said to Anna, who nodded, her grip tightening on the flashlight. Outside, Mason clenched his fists as he heard the sounds of his men being subdued. He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade glinting in the dim light. "Enough playing around," he snarled. "Let's finish this." Mason waved for the remaining 6 men to follow him as he stormed toward the entrance. If they think they can make fools of us, they're dead wrong. As Mason stepped inside, he stopped short, surveying the scene. The front of the shop was a battlefield. Tools and debris littered the floor, and 3 of his men lay groaning in various states of pain. Logan stood near the center, his weapon resting casually at his side. His eyes locked onto Mason, cold and unyielding. "You made a mistake coming here." Mason smirked, though there was a flicker of unease in his expression. Big words for a guy outnumbered. Logan's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Am I?" Mason didn't get a chance to reply. From behind a stack of tires, Ethan appeared, crowbar in hand. Anna and Matt stepped forward as well, forming a united front behind Logan. Mason's smirk faltered as he realized he wasn't facing one man, he was facing a team. "Last chance to walk away," Logan said, his voice calm but laced with steel. Mason growled, pointing his knife at Logan. "Get them." Chaos erupted as Mason's crew surged forward. Logan moved like a force of nature, his years of training kicking in. He blocked a pipe swing with his wrench, countering with a precise strike to his attacker's arm. The thug screamed, dropping his weapon and stumbling back. Ethan held his ground against 2 attackers, using his crowbar to deflect blows and land sharp, punishing strikes. Though he wasn't as experienced as Logan, his sheer determination made him a formidable opponent. Matt, the youngest and least experienced, fought with raw tenacity. He dodged an incoming swing, then jabbed his tire iron into his attacker's side. The man yelped, retreating as Matt pressed the advantage. Anna focused on staying mobile, using her flashlight to land quick, decisive blows. She darted between the chaos, catching attackers off guard and providing support where it was needed most. Mason, meanwhile, zeroed in on Logan. The gang leader moved with surprising speed, his knife slicing through the air. Logan dodged the blade narrowly, his sharp eyes tracking Mason's every move. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Mason spat, lunging again. Logan deflected the attack with his wrench, his voice steady. "I'm just a man who doesn't back down." The 2 clashed fiercely, their movements a blur of speed and precision. Mason's strikes were wild but forceful, while Logan's counters were measured and devastating. Finally, Logan saw an opening. He caught Mason's knife arm, twisting it sharply and forcing the blade to clatter to the floor. With a powerful strike, Logan sent Mason sprawling onto his back. Mason groaned, clutching his ribs as Logan stood over him. "It's over," Logan said, his voice cold. The shop was silent, save for the groans of Mason's defeated crew. Logan, Ethan, Matt, and Anna stood tall, battered but unbroken. Outside, the faint sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police. Ethan exhaled deeply, leaning on his crowbar. "We did it," Logan nodded, his gaze fixed on Mason. For now. Minutes later, officers swarmed the shop, cuffing Mason and his men. One officer, the same Officer Grant who had visited earlier, approached Ethan and Logan. "Looks like you held your ground," Grant said, his tone a mix of admiration and disbelief. Ethan nodded, his voice firm. "We weren't about to let them take what's ours." Grant smirked, nodding toward Logan. "And you? You some kind of guardian angel?" Logan's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Just passing through." As Mason and his crew were hauled away, Ethan turned to Logan, gratitude clear in his eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you." Logan glanced around the shop, taking in the damage and the resilience of the people standing beside him. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of belonging. "You're tougher than you think, Ethan," Logan said, "but yeah, I guess we make a good team." The shop was quiet the next morning, save for the occasional creak of the building settling and the distant hum of the city. Logan Kane stood near the entrance, surveying the damage. Broken tools littered the floor. A few shelves were upended, and the faint smell of spilled lubricant hung in the air. Despite the chaos, the shop still stood, a testament to their resilience. Ethan Miles entered from the back, carrying a tray of coffee cups. He handed one to Logan, who accepted it with a nod. "Well," Ethan said, his voice heavy with exhaustion but tinged with pride. "It's not pretty, but it could have been worse." Logan sipped his coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "You held your ground. That's what matters." Matt and Anna appeared moments later, each carrying brooms and trash bags. Anna gestured to the mess with a faint smirk. Let's get this place cleaned up before the customers start asking what the hell happened. Matt chuckled, though his movements were stiff as he picked up a fallen wrench. You think the cops'll let Mason walk away from this? Ethan shook his head. Not this time. They've got everything they need, our statements, the footage, and Mason's whole crew in custody. Logan nodded. It'll stick, but Mason's not the only problem out there. Don't let your guard down. The team spent the morning cleaning and repairing the shop. Logan worked methodically, his strength and precision making short work of the heaviest tasks. Ethan focused on fixing the broken windows, using spare wood to board them up temporarily. Matt and Anna reorganized the tools and swept up debris, their banter lightening the somber mood. At one point, Ethan paused and glanced at Logan. You know, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. You're good at this. Logan raised an eyebrow. Fixing things? Not just that, Ethan replied. Leading, keeping everyone steady when things get tough. Logan shrugged. Old habits. Ethan set down his hammer, folding his arms. Why'd you leave that life behind? The military. I mean. Logan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. Too much loss. Too many ghosts. After a while, it felt like I wasn't fighting for anything anymore. Ethan nodded slowly. And now? Logan looked around the shop, taking in the determined faces of the people working beside him. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose. Now, I'm starting to think I was wrong. By mid-afternoon, the shop was back in working order. Though the boarded-up windows were a temporary fix, the rest of the space looked nearly as good as new. Ethan reopened the doors, and customers began to trickle in. One of the first was an older man with a beat-up truck. He approached Ethan at the counter, his expression a mix of curiosity and admiration. Words going around, the man said, heard you and your crew stood up to Mason Cole last night. Ethan exchanged a glance with Logan, then nodded. We did what we had to. The man grinned. Well, you've got my respect. And my business. He handed over his keys. Truck's making a weird noise. I'll let you sort it out. As the day went on, more customers arrived, some with vehicles, others just to express their support. A sense of pride began to settle over the shop, its reputation growing as a place that stood for something more than just repairs. As the sun began to set, the shop grew quiet again. Logan stood near the entrance, watching the street. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood for days was beginning to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Ethan approached, carrying 2 bottles of soda. He handed one to Logan and leaned against the wall beside him. You're not planning on disappearing, are you? Ethan asked. Logan smirked faintly. That depends. Got something in mind? Ethan gestured toward the shop. This place is better with you here. The crew likes you. The customers respect you. And, let's be honest, I'd be an idiot not to offer you a job. Logan took a long sip of his soda, his gaze distant. You're serious? Dead serious, Ethan said. Look, I know you've been through hell. And I'm not saying this shop is some magical cure. But it's solid work, honest work, and we could use someone like you. Logan didn't respond immediately. He thought about the years he'd spent drifting, carrying the weight of his past like a chain. This shop, these people, they'd given him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll give it a shot. Ethan grinned, clinking his bottle against Logan's. Welcome to the team. The next morning, Logan arrived at the shop early, the faint light of dawn casting a golden glow over the city. He stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of oil and metal. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging. Ethan greeted him with a cup of coffee, already busy preparing for the day. Matt and Anna arrived shortly after, their energy high as they joked and chatted while setting up their stations. As the first customer of the day pulled into the lot, Logan picked up a wrench and headed to the bay. He still didn't know what the future held, but for now, he was exactly where he needed to be. And that was enough. Weeks turned into months, and the shop flourished under the renewed sense of purpose shared by its team. Logan became a fixture in the community, his quiet strength earning the trust and respect of everyone who crossed his path. Ethan's business grew, bolstered by their reputation as a shop that stood for something more than just repairs. Though the shadows of the past still lingered, Logan found himself moving forward, one step at a time. The fight with Mason had been a turning point. A reminder that strength wasn't just about winning battles, it was about protecting what mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Logan Kane felt like he had something worth protecting.